politicians to be effective, they must be like wasps in a jam jar or some other. They've got to want continually, cockroach-like, to survive and to continue.
This book,
Stig.
Boris, tells us how you perceive yourself, your career. How do you think you're perceived by other people? What do you think? What words would the general public describe you?
Well, somebody did this. Yes, first of all, Stig, it's great to be back on Times Radio.
Our very first show on Times Radio.
I inaugurated this station.
You absolutely did.
I'm proud to say, and one of the many things I did in London. But look, somebody said, the BBC guy said this yesterday. He said, "Liar," and I obviously object to that very strongly, and I think that it's totally unfair.
So what words would they use, do you think?
And I think they should say, I hope that people, I'm just quoting what the Beeb guy said. And I got the ball back over the net quite firmly and pointed out that actually, when it came to the bus of truth, it was we who had the facts on our side. Remember the bus of truth in the European.
You want to start this interview off with a row? You want to start this interview off, Boris Johnson, with a row about the bus?
I want to have a fight about the bus. Yeah, I do.
Why?
Because because this is fresh in my mind.
Okay. You say in the book, 350 million on the side of a bus. You said it was good that it was disputed because it meant it was talked about more. And we know, I would put this to you, Boris Johnson, that a disputed fact is more useful to you in a campaign than an absolutely objectively true fact.
What is absolutely objectively true is that 350 million, actually, which is an underestimate. If you look at the figures that were projected, it was going to go up to probably 420 at least, or maybe 450 by 2020. And that was the gross figure, as we said repeatedly in that campaign. And yes, it was true that to calculate the net figure, the figure that was sent to Brussels, for Brussels to spend on Spanish bullfighting or tobacco farms or whatever the hell it happened to be, you had to cut it in half, and it was probably about 175 million. There was then 175 million that was spent in the UK at the discretion of Brussels that we did not control. Therefore, and by this time people's eyes had glazed over, but you were making the point that huge sums were being spent in a way that the UK electorate did not control. And it was very, very important to get that point over. And that sum would have continued to increase. And by the way, thanks to Brexit, we've been able to get that back. And just to, I don't want to, harp on about this BBC interview yesterday, but he then tried to dispute another claim, which was about the vaccine rollout, and he said, well, we hadn't actually yet left the EU at the end of 2020. Actually, we had left the EU. We'd come out of the EU, and I just want you, Stig, with all your Olympian impartiality and fairness, to accept this point. Because I think it's so unjust and so that people still quibble about it, and so important. It was because we were out of the European Medicines Agency that we were able to license vaccines faster and save lives. So
you could have done that with a national regulator.
But then why? Okay, here's the question: why did 27 other countries remaining in the EU, why did the Pasteur Institute of France, the Max Planck Institute of Germany, why did they not do that? Why did they all wait weeks and weeks?
So the argument you're making is a psychological one, which is about groupthink, which I understand. But
it's not about groupthink. It's about the power. It's about the power of the Commission and the way the system works. And no country, I can tell you, no country in the EU would have done that.
People may concede that point. If you will concede,
I want you to concede it.
Okay, if you will concede, Boris, that you could have done it.
I concede no points.
Well,
what are you going to concede? What do you want me to concede?
I want you to concede that you could have done it if we were still in the EU. You could have done it using the national regulation. You could have done it. You were legally able to do it.
If you'd had a Brexiteer government,
you could have done it.
That was on the point of leaving the EU finally and formally anyway,
my point is,
then you would have done what we did.
So legally and technically, you could have done it.
It would never have happened.
But you could have done it.
And by the way, not only that, we would have remained within the EU, and because this is sort of total nonsense, and people need to understand. We would have remained not just in the EU vaccine licensing procedures under the European Medicines Agency, but we would also have been within the EU vaccine procurement process, which would have been totally chaotic. And so the result was, and I know it's tough to accept this, but it's true. The result was that because we'd fully taken back control of our legislation and our regulation, and as I explain in Unleashed, that was because we believed in a model of British independence, because we basically believed in Britain, we were able to vaccinate people faster than any other European country. And let me remind our viewers, or listeners, anybody who's still tuning in, of the figures. 45% of all adults by March 2021, almost everybody over 80, 90, 100% of those over 80 in the UK, huge levels of protection already by March. In the EU, because of their relative slowness, because of they waited for the EMA, they'd done 10%, right? 10%. So, and this was a time when hundreds of people were dying every day. You know, January actually we had maybe 1,000 people dying every day sometimes.
And I want to get to COVID.
Now, what we were able to do, therefore, was of material benefit to elderly and vulnerable people.
And that's the case.
And so what I'm setting out in this book is an argument about, you know, we went through all the psychodrama of Brexit and people's worries about it and all the rest of it. What I'm trying to say is, almost immediately after we'd done it, in a way that nobody predicted or expected, it actually delivered a material benefit.
And you've made the case there about
people.
vaccinations, but the model of Britishness that you talk about, the success of Brexit that you talk about in the book, is not a view shared now by the majority of your fellow citizens. Most people think Brexit has not been done properly. Well, most people, wait till I finish, think that it has not worked, that it can't work. If there was a referendum tomorrow morning, Leave would lose and would lose soundly, because the model of Britishness,
go on.
But the model of Britishness you're talking about has not worked. You have not convinced your fellow citizens, and do you know what they think, Boris Johnson? They think you didn't know how it was going to work, and so it became that you couldn't control it after it had happened.
Yeah, well, that's complete nonsense. So first of all, your first assertion there, which is total nonsense, is that if there were a referendum tomorrow, then Leave would inevitably lose, or people would vote to rejoin. That's what you're...
I'm not saying, no, I'm not saying vote to rejoin. The last poll I've seen on this, Remain would win 55-31. So
you think that people would vote to rejoin?
I think if you had the vote again, it would be very, very different.
So the hypothesis is, your hypothesis is that now, having...
If you have your vote, the question is if you had your vote again, it's not to necessarily rejoin. Let's say rejoin. Well, it's a hypothetical poll, isn't it?
I don't see what you're saying, but if in order to vote for joining the EU, and we're out of the EU now, right? So you're imagining a vote in which people vote to rejoin the EU.
You think you've convinced most people in this country of the success of Brexit?
So I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. You're saying that the people of this country would now vote to rejoin the EU. Let me tell you why I think that's...
51%, let me tell you another fact. 51% of people say the negatives of Brexit outweigh the benefits.
Is that what you're now saying?
I'm not saying this. YouGov polled recently, 51% of people that say the negatives of Brexit outweigh the benefits.
I was told that you were a very kind of gentle, sort of ruminative type of interview.
I'm interested in a ruminative interview, Boris. We started this interview with you picking a fight that I didn't even start.
Okay, that's true. I put my hands up to that one. Okay, I'm guilty of that. Okay, but listen, seriously, on your point about another referendum.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way: another referendum.
Fine.
Right? Now, and what the choice for the British people is, given that we're now out, the choice is between going back in or staying where we are.
And
right?
you think you convince people?
So you've got to imagine, Stig, that you, as a proud, passionate Remainer, can convince the British people to go back into the European Union and hand over 20 billion quid a year, much of it to be spent by Brussels in the EU, all of it to be controlled by Brussels, you've got to imagine that if the price that what they get in exchange is giving up control of their legislation, their regulation, again, giving up control of their laws, giving up control of their borders, going back to unrestricted free movement with the EU, and giving up control of their monetary policy, and because those are the rules of joining the EU, giving up the pound sterling in favour of the euro. Now you've got to. That's the case that you would have to make.
So the bridge has been burnt, is effectively what you're saying. The bridge has been burnt.
I'm suggesting to you that the very first assertion that you made, that people would vote to rejoin the EU, is, I think, completely mistaken. Completely mistaken.
And people wouldn't do that. Okay.
And I don't think they would do
that. Tell us a story.
And so on things like immigration, where I've got to put my hands up and say that after the pandemic, we faced a huge problem. I mean, immigration clearly gone off a cliff during the pandemic, and the numbers went massively down. But after the pandemic, the issue that we faced was inflation. And you will recall what happened. We didn't have anybody to stack the shelves. We had serious price inflation. We had massive labour cost inflation. We didn't have any fuel drivers. And every single business group, every single Secretary of State was saying, we need the labour force. And so I don't think it was, it was perfectly understandable.
But you opened the doors too wide.
Advisory committee in some sectors, social care and others, decided that we had no choice. But
let's put this in plain English. You opened the doors too wide.
I think that we did in that year, 2022, because we were desperate to contain inflation. Inflation is a massive destroyer of people's livelihoods and of economic, of hope, of investment, of growth. Inflation is a disaster for the UK. I remember it from my childhood in the 70s.
And people, I think people understand that.
People understand. So we had to beat it. But now the beauty of the position, Stig, let's get back to Brexit.
I want to move on from Brexit.
I know. But
you started off on Brexit. I wanted to say whether did PG Woodhouse influence your writing style, and we're coming to have a 10-minute row about Brexit.
We might as well have our
get to PG Woodhouse.
Have our crosswords first.
But you talk about the pandemic. Let's talk about the pandemic.
Yeah.
COVID chapters, obviously, a major part of the book. There's a slight feeling in them, Boris Johnson, that a bit of an extended plea. It wasn't me, Gov, who's responsible for this.
Have you actually read all this book?
I've read all this book.
Have you read all the bits where I put my hands up and say?
You caveat how you put your hands up. All I'm saying is, tell us now one thing you'd do differently when it comes to the pandemic, with the benefit of hindsight.
Well, as you will read in Unleashed.
Our listeners have not read the book. That's why we're having this interview.
Oh well, there's lots of things I would have done differently.
Give us a substantive one.
Well, I think that the most important thing is that we need in future as a country. I mean, we are going to get another plague, another pestilence that may kill different demographic groups, and we're going to be challenged with the problem of how to stop transmission of a disease we can't see. And the same arguments are going to be made again about lockdowns. And we're going to need to know to what extent lockdowns, the NPIs, non-pharmaceutical interventions, actually bend the epicurve, and to what extent the bending of the epicurve happens naturally.
Yeah. And do we know that now?
We don't know that now.
Why do we not know that now?
I don't know that now. Maybe you know that.
No, I don't. But why don't we know that?
Because I think it's very, very difficult to evaluate. And I think that I've seen some papers that the scientists have done in the Journal of the Royal Society and so on. It's very thin stuff. Very, very thin stuff.
So do you think there might be lockdowns again in that world? If we don't know.
Look, I think we need. I think as a country, as a world, because everybody's tried to do roughly the same thing. Even the Swedes had a version of the NPIs. We need to work out to what extent the benefits of the restriction on transmission that you get from lockdowns are.
And it's terrible that
outweigh the disbenefits, the loss of education and so on. Because closing schools, I say in Unleashed, closing schools is a really, really hard thing to do.
It was maybe the wrong thing. Maybe the wrong thing to do.
And maybe, Stig, it was. And so what I'm saying is, in all intellectual honesty, that is, the thing. We need to know.
Yeah.
I think you can defend very much what the government did on the March on the March. It wasn't just the 23rd; it was a series of steps. So and I know you're going to want to ask about the things I regret about what happened in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office and all the rest of it. That with great, with due respect to everybody who is, infuriated by that, and I understand that.
And you'll be remembered for that, Boris Johnson. Let's talk about that, because you'll be remembered for that. There's only 2 pages in the book. I have read all 800 pages. 2 pages in the book you talk about Partygate. Partygate is going to be in the first paragraph of your obituary, I suspect. Well, you might think that's unfair,
we'll see.
But I think it might be.
Yeah.
And it looks like you say it wasn't that important. You didn't do anything personally wrong. No one did anything that wrong. Is that fair?
Well, I can only, if you read Unleashed, you will get a complete account of what I think happened.
So what do you say? What do you say, Boris? So what do you say?
So yes, I do think, and I've said, as I say in the book, I think that one of the mistakes. I think there were several things I got wrong in my handling of it, but one of the mistakes that I think I did make, and I apologise for the things we got wrong. I apologise for mistakes that were made, but the way I handled it was I got Sue Gray to do the inquiry.
Was that a mistake?
Yeah, because she then, she was presented to me as a model of political impartiality and the soul of probity, and I'm not quite sure that recent events have entirely confirmed that.
Do you think she screwed you over?
I think to some extent, yeah, probably, yeah. I think that I shouldn't. I think that another mistake I made was issuing a blanket apology for. I sort of went out and said, "Oh, I'm very sorry for everything that's gone on." And the trouble was, a lot of stuff was alleged about what had happened in Number 10 that later, in Sue Gray's report, for instance, there was stuff about a woman vomiting. I later actually got to the bottom of the thing with the woman concerned, an official in Number 10, and she'd vomited because she was ill, and it was completely, the allegation was against her was completely false.
But you do concede.
There was something about fist fights, which again turned out to be completely untrue.
I understand.
So what Sue? Do you remember there was a famous journalist called Robert Fisk? Do you remember Robert Fisk?
Fisking, yeah.
She fisked it basically, and she cherry-picked stuff. She sat people down. I'll tell you what happened. She sat people down, and she said, "You tell me what you pour out your heart, and none of this will be used against you. You say everything that you can remember about things that might have been, like a party in Number 10." And she had hundreds of young officials, not all of whom were necessarily, favourably disposed towards me or towards each other.
So you were stitched up,
saying all sorts of things, and she then composed something that I think, it's my opinion,
yep.
I think was tendentious, because my view is that what those people were doing was working very, very hard, and this is what they were really doing, working very, very hard, round the clock in,
But they were breaking rules. But I understand. When they did break the rules, Boris, they were breaking rules they were imposing on other people. And you must have people.
And I understand why people.
And people say to you, I couldn't hold my dad's hand when he was dying. I couldn't go to this funeral. There was a party at Number 10. You weren't there, but there was a party the night before. The Queen had to bury her husband alone.
And I knew nothing about that event, and I wasn't there.
And did you feel do you think that let the Queen down?
And I've said what I've had to say about that, and I repeat my point that I do think that it is not fair to the reputation of people, and I think Sue Gray said this herself actually, to the reputation of people in Number 10 and the Cabinet Office who are working blindingly hard around the clock. And by the way, if you think that I was responsible for stuff that was happening in the Cabinet Office,
you're the boss.
Well, who was the second permanent secretary to the Cabinet Office? Can you remember?
Go on.
Can you remember the name of the second permanent secretary to the Cabinet Office?
No.
It was somebody called Sue Gray.
So she was. So she was responsible.
She was certainly as bad as responsible as I was. What was she? The whole thing was very, very peculiar. Let me put it that way.
Okay,
it was peculiar.
Let's get to the end of. Let's get to.
And I think, from my point of view, looking at it now, what I feel about it is that, I did mishandle it, and I should have done some things differently. I should have been very clear with people that there were going to be people who wanted to misrepresent them, who were going to say things about them, who were going to make exactly the point that you've just made, who were going to say, you're breaking the rules that you are yourself setting, and perhaps I should, as I say in Unleashed, perhaps I should have sent a memo round to staff saying, for heaven's sake, be. But I thought that was understood, and if you looked at the way things were organised in Number 10, the signs and so on.
I understand.
I assumed that people were obeying the rules. And I really, really don't think that people were setting out to disobey the rules. They thought they were working blindingly hard, and they were. And they were delivering the vaccine rollout, and they were...
I understand. And they were, Let's talk about the end of your regime, Boris. Rishi Sunak is casting the book as Brutus to your Caesar. There's a lovely quote that you said to yourself when he stuck the knife in. You said there was a time when you liked and trusted. You say that there was a time when you liked and trusted him. It's in the past tense, Boris Johnson. Do you dislike and mistrust him now?
Well, look, I mean, obviously that, I think it was all very sad. And that one of the points I tried to make in Unleashed is that I think it was a goof. It was, in the words of Talleyrand, it was worse than a crime, it was a mistake. I think it was Talleyrand, something like that. And, he
screwed up.
I think so. I think we weren't very far behind in the polls. A handful of points. Even in July 2022, when I resigned, the Reform Party, Stig, which went on to do us so much damage in the 2024 election, was nowhere. And you could not have said that the then leader of the Labour Party, that Keir Starmer, was setting the world on fire.
So if you stay in power, reform doesn't exist?
So you will find here a story about how I think our agenda of believing in Britain was right for the country and still remains right. And I think, and you can laugh at me and you can say it's all rubbish and whatever. But I think actually that if we'd all stuck together, and I'm sure all Tory prime ministers say this, if we'd all stuck together, I think we would have gone on to win.
Would you have built HS2?
And yeah, of course. And actually, I mean, the first thing Labour has done right so far in 4 ghastly months has been the splash in today's Times.
To try and get HS2 going again in a version.
That's right. And do Northern Powerhouse Rail. I mean, I don't know whether they're going to do it. But I see that.
But if you'd have stuck around, you'd have said we're finishing HS2.
I see there the hand of my old friend Peter Hendy, and who's now a Labour minister, and that is the vision that is right for the Conservative. That's how we won 14 million votes. By the way, 4 million more votes than Keir Starmer got. Starmer got fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn did.
I know.
I think our viewers need to be reminded of this. That's how we got 44%.
I understand. And for people who are interested, there's a very clear set of principles that you outline at the end of the book,
yes.
which is why you say that. There's some great pen portraits in the book. We haven't got very long, Boris. I'm going to have to insist on a sentence, and I'm going to brutally edit you here.
Okay.
You've written 800 pages in a book.
There's 738.
You were clearly not brutally edited by anyone. We'll try and brutally edit you now.
Well, come on. I think,
Anyway,
there was a lot of ground to cover.
Stop it. You're filibustering already. I'm going to give you a name. Give me a one-sentence pen portrait of these political figures who crop up in your book. You ready? Michael Gove.
Brilliantly orotund, tweedy, Scottish.
Traitor.
Always. With something interesting to say, for whom I had what was in retrospect an incurable fondness.
Dominic Cummings.
A very valuable advisor for sometimes, but not necessarily for all.
David Cameron.
A genial colleague and friend with whom I had a good and frank relationship.
Should have stuck around for Brexit, do you think?
You're breaking your own rule here, Stig. You're elaborating now. But I will allow. Okay, since you've broken it, since you've broken the rule, I will say that yes, I thought that was the problem, and I thought that like other European leaders, having called the referendum, he should then have had a plan for either eventuality. And one of the things, I know that Remainers think it was all my fault because we didn't have a plan for government. But can I just put it to you, Stig? And people go absolutely frothing at the mouth about this. How can you have done this? You had no plan. But what, it's absurd.
He should have had the plan.
Well, we were trying to win an argument, and I've tried to explain to our listeners why that argument was so important about a particular type of independence. And I've tried to give the example of the vaccines, but there are many, many other things. And it was about it was about the Constitution, it was about the law, it was about independence, about freedom. If people had thought that Govey and I were sitting in the back of that bus writing out lists of who was going to be in the cabinet and our plan for the negotiations.
Cameron should have done that.
They would have thought they would have thought that it was all about Tory power politics.
I broke the rule, and I've encouraged you.
Completely ridiculous.
Theresa May, can you do any better than old grumpy knickers?
Yeah, no, that's not fair. Sorry about that.
It's in the book.
Theresa.
Give me a sentence.
Theresa is occasionally a bit starchy, but with a very warm heart beneath it.
Liz Truss.
Genuinely original and creative conservative thinker who clearly, have had a series of unfortunate circumstances during her premiership.
Donald Trump. You're quite warm about Donald Trump in this book.
Yeah. But I disagree. So I disagree with him strongly about
on Ukraine.
On the because I think that's an open question where he is on Ukraine. But on the January the 6th stuff,
does that put him beyond the pale? Actually,
I really, no, it doesn't, because in my view, whatever he intended, and I personally don't think he intended to. Overthrow the Constitution. And what actually happened was the peaceful transfer of democratic power from one administration to another. And that's what should happen.
And has got to happen in November.
And has got to happen in November. But on Ukraine, look, I think that some of the pessimism is overdone. And I think that Donald actually, he gave the javelins to the Ukrainians where the Democrats didn't, right? When I was foreign secretary, he kicked out those Russian spies, 60 of them.
So he's
he can surprise very much on the upside. And as I say in Unleashed, when you look at some of the stuff he did when I was on the foreign side, bombing the hell out of Bashar al-Assad, when again we'd done nothing, the Democrats had done nothing. When Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, Trump really got aerated about that and did something. And with the Iranians, he was particularly tough on them. I mean, look, I happen to believe that when Donald Trump says that had he been president in 2022, there would have been no Russian invasion of Ukraine, my view is that is a credible assertion. I really do think that's credible.
A couple of things before you go. I'm a scruffy git, so I can say this to you, Boris Johnson.
Yeah. Why? How dare you interview me without a tie on?
You are a scruffy.
I want you to know.
Listen.
Why are you not? Why? And you're not.
I wear trainers. I wear a t-shirt. It's not about me. It's about you. You are a scruffy git, Boris Johnson. You're known for being a scruffy git.
I would rather be a scruffy git than take suits paid for by a Labour donor who was then given a pass to number 10.
So explain
worth thousands and thousands of pounds,
Boris,
and then not hand the money back when you're exposed.
People will be aware of that political point. Have people said to you, "Come on, Boris Johnson, you're too scruffy to be Prime Minister. Sort your act out." Has anyone ever said that to you?
You, Stig, from your vantage point, the moral high ground that you claim in your black T-shirt.
So you're saying no one's ever
your scruffy jeans.
So you're saying no one's ever said
your baseball boots that only you have felt sufficiently
no one has ever said to you.
No one's ever
said
to
you
that.
You're too scruffy.
Nobody.
In your life.
Not a single.
Never
not
once
a
in your
single
life.
Conservative matron.
Even your missus. Even your wife.
Nobody has said that. And you, by the way, you are scruffist. You are discriminating against those. I think that you are in danger of being prejudiced, not just against those who want freedom and independence and believe in Britain. I think you are clearly scruffist. You discriminate against people who through no particular fault of their own, find that their back is so configured that their shirt comes out
So you
on
are
the back of
scruffy.
their trousers. And there will be many, many people who think that that's unfair and elitist and wrong, particularly from somebody who is not making any particular effort, as far as I can see,
That's very fair.
to wear a tie himself. And I repeat my point, in case you missed it earlier, I would rather be a scruff than take suits from Lord Ali, or indeed allow my wife's clothes to be bought by some other guy and then not hand the money back when you're exposed. I think it's ridiculous.
Last question for you, Boris Johnson. The book epigraph is Hasta la vista, from, I presume, your great hero and body double, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Like him, I'm like a condom stuffed with walnuts.
You really are.
Yes.
In the flesh, I can really see that. It means see you again. He also said, I'll be back. Are you going to be the leader of the Conservative Party again?
I think my chances of being leader of the Conservative Party again are about as good as being blinded by champagne cup, decapitated by a frisbee, locked in a disused fridge, reincarnated, or being interviewed by Stig Abell in a friendly, calm and convivial.
Do you want to be?
In a convivial. Actually, it's been perfectly friendly, calm and convivial.
Do you want to be?
Let me say.
Do you want to be, Boris?
Uncontentious. My chances of being Conservative Prime Minister are about as good as my chances of being interviewed by Stig Abell for Times Radio in an uncontentious and undisputatious matter.
This is not disputatious, Boris Johnson. Would you like to be? Do you harbour any ambitions?
I think, as I say, all the answer to this question is contained, of course, in the pages of Unleashed.
Indeed.
And I think the real answer is what Her Maj, the Queen, said, and I can say that without breaching any confidence. You should only do things if you think you can be useful. I look at you haven't asked about the current Tory leaders because you think I'm not going to say anything about them, but I will say something. I think that actually the candidates are very good.
So they're
make some excellent conversations about where we need.
So you can't be useful now. You don't think you can be useful?
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
So you're not saying that, Boris Johnson. You're not saying that. So you still harbour something. There's a little kernel there.
I think I once said for all politicians, for politicians to be effective, they must be like wasps in a jam jar or some other. They've got to want continually, cockroach-like, to survive and to continue. And the reason that's important, that's not that's what I want to make it. That's not necessarily a despicable thing.
No.
From the point of view of the electorate, because we all need people who really, really want to do their best for us, and I think we're lucky. We have some very.
And do you still have that? There's something there.
You'll find the answer in the pages of Unleashed.
Boris Johnson,
which is all too short.
It's all too short at 800 pages. It began with a disputation I didn't start, but it was a very
ended with harmony on the point of our dress codes.
Yes,
you mustn't be scruffist. Some people can't help it.
Okay,
think of that. Don't discriminate against the scruffy.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.